Welcome everyone to My Life, My Business. Wish I was here. And it's quite interesting is that last week Shanaz shared on doing your own brain surgery. It was actually quite fascinating. So it's a great listen. You can either listen here on Clubhouse itself on the playback, or you can actually listen to the edited version on our YouTube channel, the Mufasa Coaching Practice. So you can go in there and listen. It's my turn this afternoon, and what I'll be talking about is carrying the mantle of favor. And I'd like to start about telling the story of Joseph. Now, Joseph, his story is detailed in Genesis 37, where it all starts. And interestingly enough, commercially, if you've ever come across a musical called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, a musical that was written by playwright Tim Rice in collaboration with Andrew Lloyd Webber. And also, if you can get hold of the movie Joseph, the King of Dreams. But I want to go right down to the source of where the story comes from, and maybe we have enough time to finish the story. So Joseph was an interesting 17-year-old, absolutely loved by his father. In fact, he had 11 other brothers, and his father loved him the most. And because of that, he made him this richly ornamented robe and this amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, if you like. And as parents, you know one thing: if you favor one child above the others, what you cause is the inevitable jealousy. So, more than just being jealous, his brothers absolutely hated him because they it was clear for them to them that their father loved him more than anything else, and they could not speak a kind word to him. And then, as the story goes, Joseph had a dream. Naive but excited, he told his brothers about this dream, and they hated him all the more because in this dream he was effectively sharing with them that one day what he saw in the future is that they would be bowing to him, and they absolutely was really disgusted and jealous even more. And it's not as if he was totally insensitive. I just wonder, he probably saw their reaction, sensed their reaction. Then he had another dream to confirm the first dream, and he told them again. And it effectively spoke about him telling him that he was in another dream and that the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to him. Now, the 11 brothers, the 11 nations, and so forth. And he told his father as well. And his father was also initially just taken aback by this and rebuked him. How dare he asking him, "Do you think my mother and I and all your brothers will be bowing down to him? We'll be bowing and scraping the ground for you." And so, I mean, listen, if you really do not understand this inflamed hate and jealousy, but this is unbridled, and if you just leave it like that, undealt with, it eventually comes home to roost. So one day, Joseph's father sends him to go find his brothers. They were shepherds and they were looking after the father's flocks. And when they saw him come from far off, they started plotting, and they started plotting to kill him. It was that serious. They said, "Well, there's the dreamer. Come, let's kill him and let's throw him into a cistern." Now, a cistern was sort of a reservoir of old as a hole in the ground, basically. And they wanted to throw him into this hole and basically just tell the father that a ferocious animal has devoured him. And what they then said was, then let's see what comes of his dreams. And what is interesting, what I want you to note that, he was excited about the dream that he had, and then he told people around him. And isn't it interesting that many times we have a vision for our life and we're excited about it and we share this to people, and their response sometimes could just be, "Well, you know what, you need to be a realist. You know what, you need to take your heads out of the clouds, come back down to the earth," and kind of comments like that, and in so doing begin to kill off the dreams. And that's why many times we not just don't share our dreams, we begin to snuff out the dream as it begins to develop in ourselves. And he, on the other hand, as a 70-year-old, had no problem and he shared it. And so trusting of his brothers, believed in their goodness despite the fact that actually they had this evil intent in their hearts. So, when they got to him, when Joseph finally got to his brothers, they the first thing they did was interesting because he was wearing this robe that his father gave, this wonderful robe, multicolored robe, his dream coat. They stripped him of this coat and they threw him into this cistern, this hole in the ground, this pit. And it's described this robe as richly ornamented. It was amazing. So he's in this dry pit, and then they start scheming even further. They sell him for something like 200 US dollars. That's about 3,600 rand. They sold him into slavery. I mean, can it get any worse? The betrayal by the people he trusted the most. So what they did was they slaughtered a goat, and dipped this particular robe in the blood, and they took it to the father. And the father then believed that his son was ripped apart and devoured by a ferocious animal. And so, the story goes that the slavers that bought him, they sold him in Egypt to one of Pharaoh's officials, one of the captains of the guard named Potiphar. So here was the young man who saw this vivid dream and he ends up being a slave. And, how many times don't we set out and, we proceed towards a particular vision that we have, a dream, a goal, objective, but along the way, things go horribly wrong. And, and yes, and it seems like the whole world is against us, and we become slaves and victims to circumstances. But what is interesting about Joseph was when he was working for Potiphar, for the captain of the guard, he was so conscientious, he was so dedicated in everything that he put his hands to was really successful. He was anointed and blessed until Potiphar put him in charge of his entire household and entrusted him to his care everything he owned. So because of this, when you read in the Bible says the blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in his house and in the field. So he was absolutely in charge of everything in Potiphar's house, had access to everything except one thing, Potiphar's wife. However, they say that in the story goes that Joseph was a handsome young man and well built. And Potiphar's wife saw this. Now, I don't know, out of sheer idleness, she absolutely was attracted to this young man. And day and night, she pitched for his attentions and wanted him to have sex with her. And his inborn character, came to the fore as he rejected her advances and said, "But this is not right because my master trusts me with everything, including you, and I shall not do so. I shall not touch you." What was interesting, eventually, she got to the point where she physically tried to force him to have sexual relationship with her. And he as she grabbed hold of cloak that he was wearing, and he slipped out of the cloak and left. And it was interesting, this is the second time that he loses his clothes. The wonderful technicolor coat, he lost that robe. Now he loses the robe again and he escapes and he runs away. She, because she's been rejected, then tells her husband, "Look, this slave that's in our house has tried to force me to have sexual relations with him. And look, and when I defended myself, he left his coat behind. And so Potiphar had no choice but to imprison Joseph. And it's interesting, rather than putting him in a normal jail, Joseph was put in a jail um, that was actually meant for the king's prisoners. You know, people that worked for the king. That particular jail. And it's amazing that physically the mantle, the robe that he was wearing was stripped of him. And I want you already to see that the favor was upon him. In Potiphar's house, God's favor working through him and on him. And now he finds himself in jail. And guess what? God's favor continues with him. There was a calling on his life, there was a purpose to his life. And once again, he was placed in charge of the entire prison. It was amazing that, you know, he transitioned from what was a normal life in a family that loved him, accepted him, his father and his stepmother, and yet he lost his robe, moved into a new place, found a new place of favor in Potiphar's house, lost his robe, found himself in prison. Once again, though, the favor of the Lord is upon him. And once again, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because he trusted him so much. Because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did, even in prison. And what is interesting is that he was given a dream at 17. So now he finds himself in prison. And now he becomes the interpreter of dreams. Because in this king's prison, two people were held in prison. The king was very upset with him. It was the king's cupbearer and the baker, and both of these gentlemen had dreams. Now the cupbearer had the dream, which just basically spoke about seeing in his dream a vine in front of him, and on this vine were three branches. And as soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in his hand, and he took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. And Jacob interpreted that in 3 days he would be restored to his position as cupbearer. Now, at the same time, the king's baker also had a dream, and he was so encouraged about this with this positive interpretation of the dream that he was quite willing to share his. And this chief baker said, "Well, I too had a dream, and on his head were three baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." And Joseph interpreted the dreams, and in 3 days he's going to be beheaded. And so it was. So, as it transpired, cupbearer within 3 days was restored. But Joseph asked him that, "Listen, since I have interpreted this for you, can you please mention this to Pharaoh so that I might have favor, so that I might be released from prison?" And what was interesting is, as soon as the cupbearer was restored, and his life of hard labor was over, he completely forgot about his promise. 2 years later, what reminded him was another dream. All right, so this is now dream number 4 and dream number 5. Right? It first started with the dream. Well, actually, the dream that Joseph had. In actual fact, the Bible tells us he had 2 dreams. So that's actually dream number 1 and dream number 2. Then in prison, there were dreams number 3 and dreams number 4 that he had to interpret. Then all is forgotten. He does what he does in prison. He remains faithful. The warden is extremely happy with him, a man to be trusted and faithful, right? 2 years later, it takes Pharaoh's 2 dreams, right? Dream 5 and 6 to remind this cupbearer that there was this young person in prison who interpreted his dreams, because nobody could interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And I mean, this was Pharaoh, right? He had all the amazing, wise people around him, paid them huge salaries, and they could not interpret the dreams. So Pharaoh summons Joseph out of prison and tells Joseph the dreams. And Joseph was able to interpret these dreams. And it merely, the dreams themselves boil down to this, is that there were 7 years of plenty coming, of full abundance coming, followed by 7 years of lack, of poverty. And um, Joseph interpreted this to Pharaoh. And then he suggested to Pharaoh that appoint somebody that you can trust, somebody wise, that can be put uh, can be placed in charge of this abundance and save 20% of everything during the good times to cover the 7 years of lack and drought in the bad times. Pharaoh's response was, he placed Joseph in charge, gave him his ring, and said, "There's no one else in Egypt above you than me in this entire land." And so 13 years later, because at this stage Joseph was 30, the dream that he had was realized. And the amazing thing was, from when he had the dream to when it was realized, I want you to see that he remained a person of good character. He learned in his father's house to be a good steward. He learned some management skills because I think his father did that, paid special attention, and he learned and he applied those. He was, even though he was sold into slavery, he never became a victim of slavery. His purpose remained paramount. He served in his purpose, and it was impossible to keep him down because of the favor. And it was interesting is um, when Pharaoh placed him in charge of the palace, and that all the people will respect his orders. He said, "Only with respect to my throne will you be greater than me." And you know what the beauty of this story is? All the robes that Joseph was stripped of, it stripped off the robe that his father made for him, stripped off the robe that he wore as the most important thing in Potiphar's house. It was restored because Pharaoh dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And it came full circle. Whatever was stolen, robbed from him was restored. And the thread, once again, is the dream. I believe he never gave up on his dream. I firmly believe that. And even though it was his dream, he was given the wisdom to interpret other people's dreams. And that triggered the realization of his own dream. And I just want you to be encouraged when you listen to this. Yes, you might say, but this is like a simple story, and if you watch the movie, it's a cartoon. I want you to see something though. That when you have a dream for your life, and when you step into that dream and you believe it and you begin to take the steps towards it, and we're talking about sometimes even baby steps, and even when life throws you curveballs, understand that when you embrace the mantle of favor throughout, you believe and you have faith that it will be realized, right? You do everything in your power. And listen, the point is, you don't sit around on your hands and you do nothing. No, you apply what you have. You apply all your God-given talents and gifts, and you serve others. You serve the purposes of others so that eventually you can fulfill your purpose fully. Anyway, I'm going to end it there today. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the rest of Joseph's dream as it was fulfilled, but I'll do that at a later stage. Thank you, everyone.
All the principles behind the story of Joseph always inspires me.
Mm-hmm.
And I particularly like the fact that, he just thought differently about his circumstances. And, my one of my favorite parts about the story is the fact that he can be in prison. When you look actually at the Bible, what the Bible says is that he was in prison and he became the best in there. That I think the prison warden, whoever, jailer, whatever you want to call it, actually gave him the keys of the prison. And so, it doesn't matter what your circumstances, you can still be excellent there, and that prepares you, I think, when you're not discovered yet, for the next step.
Yeah, and when people talk about favor, sometimes people promise you, sometimes people spot the potential in you and they have a conversation. You say, you have the potential to become the best version of yourself, and you kind of feel a little bit, oh, I wonder what you're seeing. I truly believe what you're seeing? I think the first step is to believe in your own potential, believe in the potential that others see in you, believe in the potential that you maybe revealed to you, like with Joseph in a dream. It could be a supernatural experience. But here's the expectation, what you got to prepare yourself for is that sometimes you walk a journey. In his case it was 13 years. In other stories, I could tell you takes them 40 years to get where they need to be, but a dream shall be fulfilled. It is make yourself useful, serve. I think the whole aspect of servant leadership, serving the dreams of others, does not mean you are being distracted and diverted. No, it's your apprenticeship for you to live your own dream one day. So never give up, persevere. Persevere into having character, and that character produces the hope that even though it looks like this right now, it's not going to look like this tomorrow. So, yeah. So I just want to encourage you with that for those of you listening. Shanaz, any last words?
Just to say that, Joseph is the ultimate resilient person, and sometimes you may not think of God's favor being on you, but that's sometimes about the things that you are needing to do, in the circumstances, and maybe you currently don't think about it, or you just feel like you're in that prison. And that sometimes, as I said, I think I made a comment about psychological slavery. Sometimes we still have that mindset, and it's about changing that mindset.
Well, that was the final word. Thank you, Shanaz. Thank you, Julia, for being there, being our scribe in the background and tweeting it. So, yeah, I want to encourage you, have a wonderful week. We will speak to you again next week. Take care now. Bye.